Hey folks, Doug Stein with PPE Advantage. I'm here talking with Elliot Singer. He goes by Elie, and Elie and I have been exchanging information and data over the last few weeks and months, and I find him in a real credible source. He looks at the analytics in a completely different way than I did, and we talked the other day, and he just blew me away. So I wanted to get him on camera. We want to have a discussion about what people perceive as a softening in the marketplace, because I completely disagree. And so, Elliot and I were talking the other day, and again, he came from a completely different angle, the exact opposite. I worked from production numbers all the way down to what gets brought into the US. He worked from the standpoint of need. And thanks for jumping on here, for a couple of minutes with me, Elliot, and take it away, because that was
my pleasure. So if you look at the number of people that work in hospitals in the country, my thinking was to build up from the ground up to try and figure out what the needs are in a hospital. So just to keep things simple, we'll keep the numbers that that actually are close enough to whole numbers. So there's roughly 5.7, 5.8 million people that work in hospitals in the country, all hospital employees, and all hospitals. Let's round it up to 6 million to make life easy. 6 million people, they generally have 2 hands each, so it's 12 million hands. 12 million hands. Some nurses and doctors change gloves 10 times a day, 15, 20 times a day. They see a lot of patients. Sometimes you have people working in the food services area, custodial, they change it maybe 2, 3 times, maybe once. Let's average it 10 because it's an easy number. So 12 million hands a day, change gloves 10 times. So we're looking at, obviously, a nice round number, 120 million or so gloves a day, times every 10 days is 1.2 billion gloves, and times 30 days in a month is 3.6 billion gloves a month. So let's say the base need, without any other Best Buys or any other chain banks or any other airlines using gloves, the hospitals need a bare minimum, let's call it, to round it up, 4 billion gloves a month. That's not necessarily during a pandemic. That's my first thought. The second thought is that the hospitals.
Can I interrupt you for a minute? So 4 billion gloves a month in the hospitals translates to how many boxes? Did we do that math?
Sure, 40 million boxes.
40 million boxes. Okay, great.
So 4 million cartons, which makes sense, because during the months of let's say August, September, October, November, you and I were both tracking it differently, but we were seeing that that's more or less around what was being brought in.
Yep.
Which during non-COVID times might have been enough, except that during COVID, everybody is gloving that much more, and that much more carefully, and double gloving. Not to mention the fact that we have every employee of every large corporation that's dealing with the public that's been wearing gloves for 6, 9, 10 months. In banks and airlines, everybody's wearing gloves. So you have all that competition, not to mention the fact that the rest of the world is competing with us for gloves as well. So it's put strain on the distribution chain. That's clear. A number of other things that put a lot of strain on the market, but I think a lot of the factories have, obviously, the prices of NBR going up, other raw materials, and that's not coming down anytime soon. It's a finite resource. Someone pointed out, I'm trying to remember, I think it was the chairman of Heart of Leg, or maybe Top Glove, in an article, that while it takes a year or so to add more lines in a factory that makes gloves, it takes about 2.5 to 3.5 years to make a factory that makes more nitrile, the raw material.
Yep.
So there's that lag no matter what.
Yep. Totally agree. So let me interject here and kind of flip the script and talk about February numbers, because I just did them, and you use Import Genius and I use Import Key, but they all have the same similar numbers. So last month there was a big influx of gloves. I counted about 80 million boxes that came into the marketplace. Now I'm thinking of revising that number, because as I told you, I found a glitch in the numbers where there are duplicate container numbers, because if a shipping date gets bumped, it also gets into the system. And so 2 containers show coming in for only 1 shipment. So that was a glitch that my customs broker pointed out to me, and I'm thinking about going back to revise it. But then you and I kind of went through the numbers the other day, and I just finished my sheet, and only 32 million boxes came in February. And I expect in March it's going to be even less, because Chinese New Year, Tet holiday in Vietnam, Lunar New Year in Malaysia, right? So I feel like, we're at a situation where we're like the stock market, right? We're dealing with greed and fear at this moment. And then you
Absolutely.
and I also talked about, and we pointed this out, that the quality of gloves that made its way into the marketplace in January was very less than desirable, right? An enormous amount of repacks, an enormous amount of bad nitrile, low-grade nitrile, some brands that just had no business making their way into the US. I also think, as I mentioned in one of my other posts, that for the first time, a lot of newcomers finally landed those 2, 3, 1, 5 containers that they've been trying to get for 5, 6 months. They didn't have end buyers. They didn't have a distribution channel set up. They panicked, and all of a sudden they started lowering prices, which is exactly what happens in the stock market when there's a run on a stock. So, just get your opinion on that as well. I think we're kind of on the same page there, but I think the quality issue is a real big deal, and the weird brands.
I completely agree with you. Your analysis, by the way, is spot on, and also creative. Just figuring out how to weed out the ones that are duplicates. You mentioned another thing about duplicates, and it's also spot on, in my opinion. There are a lot of other things that I think are hurting the market that you mentioned to me in a conversation we had in the last couple of days, which was that a lot of people got burned, end users got burned.
Yeah.
And when they get burned with a bad lot, everyone's afraid, especially supply chain chiefs. They're afraid to make another bad decision, especially, because you haven't dealt with the fallout of the first one. So people are paralyzed. They don't know who they can buy from. And the big companies are rolling back their allocations, not adding them. So it's a problem. And I think that we're going to have these weird, panic modes where it's, oh, we don't have enough. And I think when the hospitals start opening up, in places like Texas where they're taking off their masks entirely, I don't know what's going to happen, but I worry for people in Texas. But I think even regular places where the COVID, like the state of New York, where the COVID levels drop down to a really, encouraging level, you have the hospitals that are going to be opening up that are doing a year and a half worth of elective surgeries that they haven't done. So it's going to be dicey. It's, you need a lot more. And so I think that the pressure is going to be, it's going to be weird. It's going to be this weird, crazy up and down that you mentioned.
Yeah, I think that's a great analysis. So I think the people that are going to be focused on bringing in good quality gloves with real certificates, with real backup on their testing, that are coming from real factories, that have distribution with a good brand, are going to win the war. This is no different than bringing a good product into market and finding distribution. So I think all the panic is crazy. I don't think we're going to see a collapse in the marketplace. I completely disagree on that. I think the numbers in February were exactly, I thought there was going to be a huge dip, and it was. And listen, I just appreciate your analytics from that other side, because that last night stopped me in my tracks. I've been thinking about it all day, I didn't even evaluate the usage need from a usage standpoint. I was just saying, look, normally we should have about 40 million boxes coming in, and it's COVID, so maybe 60. I don't know, So mine was just a complete spitball. Yours actually came from some place of knowledge. So I appreciate it. Listen, it was a pleasure. I don't want to make this too long, otherwise we'll have to split it up in a couple of videos. But we're going to talk a lot more very soon. So
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
pleasure.